There are things worse than death. Watching hundreds of innocent people kill themselves and do so willingly, I can't even imagine a worse fate than that. In this life, we have so little control over any action we take. To find that such control can be stripped away from us entirely is just so terrifying. It still keeps me up at night. You see, when free will and faith become lost to the void, nothing makes sense anymore. It's a futile and dangerous experience, because hope is decimated. I once believed that hope is the only force that can't be destroyed, but I've seen what can happen when it is eroded or warped. Hope can also be a weapon of evil, to make us desperate for salvation that might never come. On the day we abandoned our cruise, I found this out the hard way. I thought rescue would be the best way toward the future, but again, I was wrong. The day started with a funeral pyre. Isaac and Bonnie were the ones to suggest it as a small amount of fog began to lift and we could see some parts of the ocean again.
Maybe if we burn the bodies, the smoke will act as a signal fire to any rescuers out there.
Sarah agreed. Of course, that wasn't the reason Bonnie did it. She felt our ship was in need of a spiritual cleansing because of all the bloodshed we are witness to, and the fire was meant to be our version of some Judaic sacrifice. I complied with the instructions given, though if only because of the smell. The bodies were stacked near the bow of the ship in an orderly pile to the best of our ability, and then, with the remaining bridge crew giving us permission, Chuck, Greg, and I went to the lower deck hold to grab some gasoline for the fire. It was while I was down there in the storage compartment that my eyes stumbled upon something that I realized could be a ticket off this deadly cruise. It was an older model inflatable, some kind that might be used in extreme weather situations. Nothing standard by any means, but I knew nothing about our trip so far had fallen under normal guidelines. I kept my mouth shut as Chuck and Greg found the necessary lighter fluid and then made sure that they didn't spot it by distracting them with some other supplies to grab on our way back. I know it sounds selfish, but the only ones I cared about getting off that ship alive right now were my wife and myself. Back up on E-deck, Isaac had started a sermon. I shuffled my way over to Sarah to pull her away from the crowd as they flocked and listened to his biblical tales and whispered to her, "I found a raft." She smiled excitedly, about to squeal with joy. Then I hushed her as those nosy passengers eyed us, and I pulled her further away toward one of the abandoned dining compartments.
We need to tell the others. With the fire going, it will give us a chance to be the first picked up by any passing ships,
Sarah said. "Are you sure these are the sort of people you want to take along with us?" I asked.
What do you mean?
I mean that they've shown us how unstable they can be. Greg nearly stabbed himself to death last night, and remember Holly and Thomas? What if we go out there on the raft and one of them sees something and acts crazy? I argued.
Logan, we can't just leave them,
she objected. Fine. We take a few, the ones who we haven't seen show any signs of unstable attitudes like Jasmine or Chuck, but not those two preachers out there. They'll throw us to the waters in a bid for a whale to save us before we get found. I muttered. Sarah nodded with a shiver and returned to the group as they joined together to light the corpses. Isaac was the one that did the deed, tossing a match onto the gasoline-covered cadavers. It took almost 20 seconds for the whole pile of rotting flesh to scorch, and as it did, dark clouds of smoke began to rise from their ashes. If we're going to do this, it should be now, while everyone is distracted, I told my wife. Sarah looked nervous about the plan. Then she saw the determination in my face, and there was this sort of connection we made right there between the two of us. So I grabbed Chuck, Jasmine, and Greg and convinced them to join us for some wine a few decks down, where I reiterated the plan to them. Jasmine seemed to be eager, but the others were more skeptical. How far can an old boat like that go? Greg asked. It has to be better than staying here and waiting for Isaac to decide we are unworthy or something. I argued. Listen, my wife and I are leaving. We want to give you the opportunity to come with us, but once we are gone, there may be no other way to escape. There may not be any rescue coming, and who knows how long it will be before these people start to turn on one another, I said. I was actually desperate for them to listen to me. And for a long silence, I believed that they weren't going to make a move. But finally, Jasmine spoke up.
Logan's right. It's now or never,
she declared. That seemed to be enough for everyone else to agree, and we moved down to F-deck with a few other eager souls. Up above, we heard the crowd singing an old war hymn. The air was resounding with their voices. It made the hair stand on the back of my neck as we went further down the emergency stairs. The fire grew and grew as we made it back to the storage room, so much so that if there was any sort of rescue out there, I knew they would see it. But the chances of that happening were slim if I was right, because there was nothing normal about this storm or the experience we've had so far. And since I was the last one still living who knew the truth about the ghost ship, I knew that before any rescue came, death would continue to spread among the passengers. For these reasons, and probably a dozen others that were rattling my brain, I knew we needed to leave. Not everyone that we were leaving behind agreed, though. As we finished moving the old inflatable out towards the railing of F deck, I suddenly noticed that the singing we had heard earlier had stopped. And then, from amid the fog above, a single shot rang out and struck Greg in the shoulder.
Holy shit!
He yelled as he dropped his side of the raft, and the rest of us fell to the ground, unsure of what to expect next as Isaac emerged from the fog carrying a long rifle. "You can't leave," he said, as a few other passengers moved towards us, not looking friendly at all. Sarah was the one who detected something different about this group.
They're moving like Thomas did.
That small warning about this group possibly being controlled like our friend was spurred Jasmine to take action. The short, dark-haired woman jumped up and rushed toward Isaac, pushing him down as the gun shot again.
Go! Go now!
She shouted as the other passengers tried to grab a hold of her. Their friendly demeanor transformed into something else entirely as soon as we showed that we were not going down without a fight. I grabbed my wife's arm, and we began to push the raft again, right over the rail. It tumbled down to the crashing waves as the passengers grabbed a hold of Jasmine, and I heard bones break. They were going to make sure that she didn't pose a threat to their insanity. And with her scream echoing across the foggy morning, the rest of our small escape crew jumped toward the ocean. The brainwashed passengers scrambled, trying to follow us as best as possible, but none of them seemed eager to jump into the water. Isaac shoved Jasmine's body over the side, her broken and battered fresh corpse hitting the water like a ton of bricks. Then he grabbed the rifle and tried again to fire at us. Sarah dove under the waves to stay out of the line of fire, while Chuck and I used what little strength we had to push the raft out into open water. Craig could only help halfway because of his injury, but somehow we managed to get beyond the scope of their gun as the waters raged around us. I remember I held my breath for a good minute and a half as I kept pushing, trying to gain as much distance as possible from the ship. Sarah and Greg were the first ones to climb into the raft, followed by Chuck and I. Even at almost 100 feet away, we could still hear the passengers singing again. This time, it didn't sound human. Despite the heavy fog, the day seemed to be covered with the most brutal humidity I had experienced in quite a while. I was exhausted from our escape and trying to keep my spirits up about searching for rescue, but we had been adrift for nearly 10 hours without a single indication of what direction we were going in or even what time it was. Occasionally, we would hear bizarre chanting from the crews, and I wondered if maybe we were trapped in some kind of a vortex, never really escaping the ocean itself. I got my answer around 1900 hours that night. Greg was the one that first started moving, trying to get the rest of us to wake. "I see something. It's massive," he claimed excitedly. I rubbed my eyes to ask him what it was when suddenly my friend jumped out into the waves. Sarah screamed in surprise as he did, and I quickly grabbed my wife and told her to cover her eyes. I remembered Jasmine's warning of the mysterious object that our cruise ship had been circling for days, and I realized that Greg had likely spotted it instead of the rescue we so eagerly anticipated. Sarah and I held on to each other as tight as possible as we felt our raft begin to drift erratically, and we heard the thrashing of water as Greg's voice became distant. Chuck slowly woke up from the rear of the raft, and I motioned him to look toward the hull. "It's not safe," I told him. But our friend didn't listen. He focused on the fog and on the sound of Greg's voice. "My lord, it's beautiful," he whispered. He stood up, eager to follow his friend into the water, but I wasn't about to let this end that way. I tackled him down, listening as the water surged around us, and I heard the sound of movement. Was there some sort of creature surrounding our small inflatable? Chuck laughed and punched me, and then desperately began to beg that I let him go. "You'll see if you look into it! You'll see the truth!" I knew he was too far gone, but I still didn't want to give up on him. I punched him again and again, squarely in the jaw, but it was a sniper rifle from above that finally finished the job. I had been so busy trying to save him and listen to the ocean, somehow or another I had missed the sound of an approaching helicopter. It seamlessly cut through the clouds, men wearing full body armor clinging to its side as it approached us, and a sniper rifle aimed toward my wife. As I dropped Chuck's body, I ran toward her and desperately shouted to the newcomers, "Please, she's pregnant!" I didn't know for sure if that was true, but I was willing to say whatever it took to save my wife. A moment later, a long rope ladder was tossed down toward our raft, and someone above us used their PA system to make an order. "Climb up one at a time, with your hands where we can see them," they said. I instructed Sarah to go first and clung to the bottom rail of the ladder as she slowly went up. The waves around us seemed to grow more and more violent with each passing second, but somehow, 5 minutes later, we found ourselves being airlifted out of the fog. "There's the rest of the ship, at least 400 still on board," I said, out of breath as I held my wife close and one of the soldiers offered her a blanket. Next to him, the small metal grating that separated us from the cockpit slid open, and a man stepped through to sit opposite of us.
"Thank you so much,"
Sarah told our rescuers. "Don't be thanking us just yet. We still have several questions to go over once we make it back to the coast," he said. No, we can't do that. We need to go back for those people," I stammered. "You will need to trust me when I say that those people are gone," he answered grimly. I didn't want to believe his words, even though I knew the truth of what I had seen and how those people had likely torn themselves apart to survive. In fact, as far as you two were concerned, you were never aboard that ship.
"What you mean?"
Sarah said, her words faltering as she saw his dour expression. "It never happened. We'll send cleanup crews to dispose of the carnage once the fog is lifted, but right now, I'm afraid the only thing that matters is getting you to a quarantine zone and making sure your body is not contaminated," he ordered. Sarah and I didn't say a word, recalling how it was that Chuck had been quickly disposed of because of some supposed infection that he had. I didn't want the same fate to happen to us. Instead, I just held her close and said a final prayer of thanks. It was the last time I ever did. They took us to Florida. I never got an actual location. We were separated for a few days, and then that same man came to talk to me. "Is my wife okay? Did she have anything wrong with her?" I asked. "Your wife is fine. We're actually more concerned about you, Logan," he answered as he slid over a few photos to me. I looked at the still images, and then pushed them back in revulsion as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. "What is that?" I asked in confusion. The photograph was taken as evidence last year during a particularly nasty incursion that we went through here. Over 100 good men and women died, he explained. "But it's not possible. That picture, it's me." He leaned over the desk and smiled thinly before stating, "As we told you before, we have a lot of questions for how it is that you're alive, Logan Washington."